Some of you, like me, may be fans of Star Wars. And if you've ever seen Star Wars, you know that the bad guy or the antagonist is Darth Vader. Now, when Darth Vader was a little boy, that is, before he became Darth Vader, his name was Anakin Skywalker. And in one of the films, young Anakin goes before Jedi Master Yoda. Yoda's the little green puppet with the pointy ears. And Yoda's going to determine if young Anakin can train to become a Jedi. And Yoda says no. He says there is too much fear inside young Anakin. And fear, says Yoda, is the path to the dark side of the Force. And then Yoda offers one of the great Star Wars quotes. He says, "Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering." Our culture tells us that suffering is a major problem that can hardly be understood, wrestled with, or overcome. Suffering is perhaps a consequence of mistaken choices, maybe even a cruel punishment by fate. The Bible, however, has a different view of suffering. Suffering is an inevitable part of life. No matter who we are or where we come from, no matter how talented we may be or how wealthy or good-looking, suffering is an inevitable part of life. Even Jesus himself, God taken on human flesh, suffered. Suffering is not all there is to life, but there is suffering in life. But not only is suffering inevitable, it can be a good thing because God can work in and through suffering. God can redeem it. God can transform it. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Romans, which Larry read so well for us just a few minutes ago, says we can boast in our suffering if we have faith in Jesus. How could it be that someone could ever say such words? How could someone suggest that we might be able to boast in our suffering? Well, for one thing, the Apostle Paul tells us that suffering leads to endurance. The Greek word, which is often in our Bibles translated suffering, refers not only to the internal experience of anguish, but to the external circumstances which are causing us a difficulty. The word might also be translated affliction. We might even say it casually, hard times. Hard times can lead to endurance. We go through something that's very difficult, and it prepares us to meet future challenges which we might not otherwise have been able to meet. Think, for example, of an athlete. In order to achieve the fitness necessary to succeed, the athlete must endure much hardship and suffering. When I was in high school, I was a competitive basketball player. And my coach believed that the most important part of basketball was fitness. And every day after school, from November to March, we would have practice for 90 minutes. And then after our 90-minute practice, we would have to run laps of the school hallways. And our coach had a rule that we had to finish within a certain window of time from the first place finisher. Well, we happened to have a player on our basketball team who was on the Canadian junior soccer team. And we had to finish within a minute or so of him. And it was absolute agony. We went through all kinds of torment. But we were fit. And sometimes life is like that. Sometimes we experience pain and difficulty and we wish it would go away, or we wish that it never happened, and we just want to get over with it. But that hardship makes us fit and able to deal with what else life has in store for us. Many of you most likely know the story of Eric Liddell. In the early 1920s, he was considered the fastest man in the world. And throughout his youth and his days of athletic training, he endured all kinds of hardship to perfect his craft as a runner and to gain a competitive advantage against his adversaries. But the challenge Liddell faced as an athlete was perhaps small in comparison to the challenge he faced as a human being. You'll likely know his story from the movie Chariots of Fire. He was favored to win gold in the 100 meters at the 1924 Paris Olympics. The news came to him that the initial opening round heat for the 100-meter competition was to be held on a Sunday. And his Christian faith did not permit him to do that on a Sunday, and he had to withdraw from the competition. He faced all kinds of criticism from his countrymen. How dare he put his personal taste before the glory of the British Empire? We can imagine his personal anguish. For years and years, he had to train to perhaps win an Olympic gold. He had to set aside that dream for what some would call an arbitrary choice. And yet it was an experience that fit him for other challenges life had on offer. Like his parents before him, he felt a calling to be a Christian missionary and went to China and ministered there for some 20 years, at times in great hardship. Perhaps like me, you look back at difficult times in your lives and realize that in those difficult times you have learned more than in all the good times put together. Maybe, like me, you might look back at a particularly difficult experience, which at the time seemed to be torment, which seemed to be never-ending, which made no sense, but which in hindsight prepared you to meet a challenge which otherwise you might have struggled to meet. The experience of suffering does not mean that God does not care about us or that God is absent. God is at work in and through all of life. And even in the hardest of times, God is at work to bring redemption and transformation. The Apostle Paul said that endurance then leads to character. Now, the word he uses for character can be also understood as something that is tested or reliable. You see, endurance by its very nature is continuous, it is ongoing, it is perpetual. And when we have developed a pattern of endurance in our lives, it begins to shape who and what we are. Long endurance through difficulty begins to transform our character. We become people who are tested and who are reliable. We become people who are perseverant and who are strong. And we be able to withstand even more difficulty because of who and what we have become. And many of you will know the story of Nelson Mandela. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, he was a political activist in South Africa, working hard to overthrow the regime of discrimination and bigotry that had existed in his country at that time. And such was the state of their society that he was essentially put into jail as a political prisoner. And he went on to spend, in fact, the next 27 years in custody, being released only in 1990. Well, by 1994, he was the president of South Africa. And was a greatly revered political leader. He experienced the kind of respect and admiration that is seldom achieved by a politician. Both during and after his political leadership, he was acknowledged as a great statesman. Well, how could this be the case? 27 years in prison is not a usual path to political success. It was the case because of the character that was formed in the person through long endurance. Nelson Mandela came out of prison not angry and embittered, but wise and gracious. And all could look to him and say, if that is the character of the person who has endured so much, then this one is worthy of our respect. This one can be our leader. Endurance breeds character. If we want to achieve some kind of career, very often we need to pass a series of tests in school. If we want to be people of character, we must pass life's tests. And having passed them, people of character we become. The Apostle Paul went on to say that character breeds hope. This is a remarkable statement coming from someone in antiquity. You see, in the ancient world, hope had a very negative connotation. For the Greeks and the Romans, hope was a bad word. It was like wishful thinking. Wishful thinking that could often as not let you down. But in the Bible, hope is a positive word. For hope is grounded in the promises and the faithfulness of God. If through our endurance we become people of character, we begin to realize how trustworthy we can become and what it is like to be people who are as good as their word. And when we become people of character and realize that one can mean and do what one says, it becomes all the more possible to see that this, in fact, is the character of the God who speaks to us and who makes promises to us. That God is as good as God's word. And so character can lead to hope. There's a well-known activist and theologian, originally from England, who lives now in America, named Edwina Gately. And many years ago, at a different stage of her career, she worked at a shelter for women in an inner city. And she tells a story which has stuck with her to this day, of a woman named Louise, who was working in prostitution, who one day came into the shelter battered and high on drugs. And Edwina Gately let Louise sort of crash on her couch for a few hours. And, Louise later woke up feeling a little refreshed, but refused all offers of other help and went on her way. A week or so later, Louise came back and again crashed on the couch, and then a few hours later left, and it became the pattern that every week or so, Louise would show up in a terrible state. And Edwina Gately would always let her crash on the couch. Now, Edwina's colleagues began to think that this was not such a good pattern to have fallen into, that she ought to ask for some more accountability and not to enable Louise's destructive behavior in this way. And Edwina acknowledged that this was probably the case, but she couldn't get the words of Jesus out of her head that one ought to forgive not just once, but 70 times 70, or without end. And one time, Louise showed up, the worst she'd ever been. Beaten up, having been sexually assaulted, and crashed on the couch. But the next morning, she stayed. She got some more help. She enrolled in a 12-step program. Eventually went back to school. And to this day is now a counselor at a center for women in recovery. Suffering, endurance, character, and hope. All these things are connected intimately. Suffering is one step on the journey to hope. And the Apostle Paul said, "Hope will not disappoint us." Hope will not disappoint us because it is grounded in the faithfulness and the promises of God, God who made us and God who loves us. Even in the hardest of times, God is with us. God is working in and through us to bring about transformation and redemption. Are we going through some hard times? If so, Master Yoda, if he were here and if he were a follower of Jesus, he might say, "Gain hope you will." Thanks and praise be to God. Amen.